What if the world's emerging economies, led by China and backed by its BRICS partners, decided they no longer wanted to play by the financial rules established in the West? What if they didn't just challenge the global economic order? They set out to rewrite it entirely. This isn't a futuristic fantasy or an abstract theory. It's happening right now. Quietly but steadily, China is engineering a shift that could redefine how money moves across borders, how nations trade, and who holds true financial power in the 21st century. Under the direction of President Xi Jinping, China has launched a sweeping campaign to reshape the foundations of global finance, one that places the Chinese yuan at the center of a new multipolar economic system. At the heart of this campaign is a tool that seems simple on the surface: currency swap agreements. These deals, signed directly between two countries, allow them to exchange their own currencies for trade and financial transactions, completely bypassing the US dollar. It's a quiet but revolutionary idea. For decades, the US dollar has been the undisputed king of international finance. It's the currency that underpins the global trading system, the standard for oil and commodities, the reserve held by central banks from Tokyo to Lagos. But China is challenging that dominance, one bilateral agreement at a time. And unlike traditional alliances or treaties, these financial pacts don't require fanfare or dramatic announcements. They're executed with precision, with long-term consequences that stretch far beyond immediate trade benefits. Imagine two countries trying to do business, say China and Argentina. In the traditional model, both would first convert their local currencies into US dollars before completing a trade. This process not only adds transaction costs and exposes both nations' fluctuations in the dollar's value, but it also reinforces a system where the United States sits at the center of every global economic exchange. Through currency swaps, China is changing that. Now, instead of going through the dollar, these countries can deal directly in yuan and pesos, or yuan and rupees, or yuan and rand. The result? A growing network of economies less reliant on American financial infrastructure, and more tied into a system with Beijing at its core. Over 40 countries have now signed currency swap agreements with China, encompassing more than $4 trillion in value. These deals are reshaping how trade is conducted, especially in the developing world. Countries from South America to Southeast Asia, from Africa to Eastern Europe, are finding that dealing in yuan isn't just practical, it's strategic. For many, it's a way to gain greater control over their economies, shield themselves from the unpredictability of the dollar, and align with one of the fastest-growing powers on Earth. The appeal goes beyond mere financial efficiency. The US dollar's dominance comes with strings attached: economic vulnerability to interest rate hikes by the US Federal Reserve, the constant threat of sanctions, and exposure to political decisions made in Washington. China is offering something else: stability, mutual benefit, and, perhaps most importantly, distance from Western pressure. Nations weary of IMF prescriptions or wary of geopolitical entanglements with the US are looking to China not just as a trade partner, but as a financial ally. And Beijing is more than willing to accommodate them. Take Pakistan, for example, a longtime strategic partner of China. In recent years, the two countries have shifted much of their bilateral trade into yuan. This move helps both sides bypass the risks associated with the US dollar, including exchange rate volatility and potential disruptions from American sanctions. It gives them autonomy, room to maneuver in a tightly controlled global financial environment. Pakistan isn't alone. In Latin America, Argentina has also begun using the yuan to settle trade with China. With its fragile economy often vulnerable to shocks in the global system, Argentina sees the yuan as a stabilizing force, a currency that offers predictability where the dollar now brings anxiety. This movement isn't limited to Asia or Latin America. In Africa, too, the signs of a shifting tide are unmistakable. Nigeria, one of the continent's largest economies, has allowed businesses to trade directly in yuan. This helps Nigerian importers save on exchange costs and reduces dependence on the US dollar. South Africa, another BRICS nation, has also increased its use of the yuan in trade. These choices are about more than money. They're about power, sovereignty, and vision. They represent a desire to break free from a system that has, for too long, left developing countries vulnerable to decisions made far outside their borders. In the past, the dollar was seen as a safe haven, a symbol of global trust. Today, for many nations, it represents something different: instability, political risk, and dependence. As the global order becomes more fractured and contested, countries are looking for alternatives. And China is presenting the yuan not just as a currency, but as a cornerstone of a new global system, one rooted in cooperation among developing nations, anchored by economic ties rather than political allegiance to the West. The trend is growing. Across the global South, the yuan is gaining traction not just as a currency of trade, but as a reserve. Some central banks are beginning to hold yuan alongside, or even instead of, the dollar. Financial institutions are adjusting, businesses are adapting, and governments are rethinking their long-held assumptions about where the world's financial power truly lies. The more countries that join China's currency network, the more momentum the yuan gains, and the less central the dollar becomes. Of course, the dollar is not disappearing overnight. It still dominates international finance in terms of scale, liquidity, and depth of markets. But its dominance is being chipped away, slowly, deliberately, and strategically. Every new yuan-based agreement, every trade deal settled without the dollar, every central bank that adds yuan to its reserves is a step toward a more diverse and multipolar financial world. The balance of power is shifting, not through confrontation but through quiet, calculated moves. And with each of those moves, China's influence grows. It's not just exporting goods anymore, it's exporting a financial system. A system that promises stability in times of uncertainty, alternatives in a world of limited options, and a future where no single country can unilaterally dictate the rules of global finance. Whether this future arrives gradually or accelerates in response to geopolitical shocks remains to be seen. But one thing is certain, the architecture of global finance is changing. The US and its allies no longer have a monopoly on how the world trades, or how money flows across continents. A new economic order is emerging, and the Chinese yuan is becoming its banner. In this new world, financial influence is no longer concentrated in Washington, London, or Brussels, but is distributed more broadly, with Beijing as a powerful anchor. For some nations, this shift brings hope and opportunity. For others, it poses a challenge to the status quo. But for everyone, it demands attention. The rules are being rewritten, not through war or revolution, but through spreadsheets, contracts, and currencies. And as the world watches, one question becomes more urgent than ever. Is the age of dollar supremacy coming to an end? And if so, what comes next? Around the world, a quiet but powerful shift is unfolding. One that could fundamentally alter the structure of global finance. Nations are no longer content to operate within a system dominated by the US dollar. Discussions are intensifying about the creation of an alternative shared currency, a bold initiative aimed at challenging the dollar's long-standing supremacy in global trade. At the center of this transformation is China, strategically positioning its own currency, the yuan, as the cornerstone of a new financial order. This movement isn't just theoretical. It's already manifesting in real-world policy, agreements, and economic behaviors. Experts are sounding the alarm that the shift away from the dollar is not only underway, but gaining speed. However, the durability of this shift will be tested in times of economic distress. It's in moments of crisis that the true strength of alternative financial systems becomes evident, and China is preparing for that test. Take Sri Lanka, for example. In the midst of a deep financial crisis, the country found itself on the verge of collapse. Its dollar reserves nearly depleted, with no clear way to continue importing the essential goods its population needed. That's when a currency swap agreement with China stepped in as a lifeline. The deal allowed Sri Lanka to access funds in yuan rather than depend on scarce US dollars, giving the country critical breathing room and demonstrating the practical power of China's financial strategy. China's currency swap agreements are increasingly being viewed not just as economic tools, but as instruments of geopolitical influence. More countries are entering these arrangements as a form of insurance against future instability. In doing so, they're not only deepening their financial ties with China, but are also subtly moving away from the orbit of US economic influence. For China, every one of these swaps reinforces its role as a trusted, stable financial partner, a counterbalance to Western-led institutions. This brings us to a pivotal question. Can the yuan actually become the centerpiece of a new global financial system? While it's still early to say definitively, the trends are becoming harder to ignore. The yuan is no longer confined to use within China's borders. It's fast becoming a critical element of Beijing's broader global strategy, a strategic lever being used to chip away at the dominance of the US dollar. Every trade deal settled in yuan, every currency swap signed, every new country that adopts it for international transactions, each one chips away at the dollar's supremacy and builds up the credibility of the yuan as a serious global contender. It's part of China's long-term vision to construct a world in which global financial power is more evenly distributed, and where it holds a leading role. Nowhere is this transition more visible than in Africa. Across the continent, the yuan is gaining traction as countries seek to reduce their vulnerability to dollar fluctuations and Western financial pressures. Economies like Nigeria and South Africa, among Africa's largest and most influential, are increasingly settling trade in yuan. For these nations, it's not just about aligning with China economically, but about asserting greater control over their financial futures. From Kenya to Egypt, governments and businesses are turning toward the yuan as a tool for greater stability, independence, and partnership. China's Belt and Road Initiative, which has poured billions into infrastructure and development across Africa, has been instrumental in expanding the yuan's presence. With Chinese banks and enterprises now deeply embedded in African economies, the yuan is becoming the currency of choice in more and more local transactions. Looking forward, the question isn't if the yuan will grow in global influence, but how fast. While the US dollar still holds its place as the world's dominant reserve currency, there's a clear gradual realignment happening. One example of this shift comes from South Africa, where the government has begun integrating the yuan into its foreign reserves. It's a notable departure from the traditional dollar-centric model, and it signals growing trust in China's economic leadership. And it's not just developing economies making this pivot. Even countries with established financial systems are paying close attention. Japan, a major global economic power and longtime US ally, has taken a significant step by signing direct currency swap agreements with China. These arrangements allow trade between the yen and the yuan, without the need for dollar conversion, essentially cutting the dollar out of the equation entirely. Moves like this mark a critical milestone, showing that the yuan's appeal is broadening far beyond China's immediate trading partners. China's ambitions don't end with bilateral deals. Within the BRICS coalition, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, there is an ongoing dialogue about creating a new shared currency that could rival the dollar in global transactions. The combined economic weight of the BRICS nations represents a significant share of global GDP. If such a currency were to emerge, the groundwork laid by China's aggressive push to internationalize the yuan would undoubtedly serve as its foundation. The implications are profound. This is not simply about trade or economics. It's about the balance of power. By expanding the yuan's role in international finance, China is attempting to rewrite the rules of the global economy. It's an effort to reduce the financial leverage that the United States has held for decades, and to position China as a central architect of a new monetary world order. Of course, significant challenges remain. The yuan is still not as freely convertible as the dollar, and China's tight control over capital flows can be a barrier for some investors and governments. But China has demonstrated a consistent capacity to adapt. Through persistent reforms, global outreach, and massive investments in infrastructure, it has steadily increased global confidence in its financial system. The road to currency dominance is not quick or easy, but China's long-term commitment to building the yuan into a powerful alternative is clear. This is not just a policy trend, it's a fundamental shift in strategy. As the yuan rises, the larger question becomes, are we moving toward a multi-currency world? A world where power is distributed, and no single nation's currency reigns supreme. We're already seeing that transformation unfold. Economic diplomacy, currency partnerships, and new financial alliances are reshaping the global landscape. The rapid rise in yuan adoption across regions signals the emergence of a more complex and dynamic financial system, one that no longer revolves solely around the US dollar. This is more than just a financial story. It's a geopolitical evolution. The yuan's expansion is helping to stabilize trade relationships, streamline cross-border transactions, and offer new pathways to economic security for many nations. Every new agreement and partnership represents another step away from a dollar-dominated world, and closer to a global system with multiple centers of monetary influence. Under the leadership of Xi Jinping, China isn't merely participating in the global economy, it's working to reshape it. This is no longer a gradual shift in financial dynamics. It's a deliberate, calculated, and potentially revolutionary transformation. A revolution that could redefine how global finance operates, who leads it, and whose currency sets the terms. So, are we witnessing the dawn of a new financial era? Could the yuan, and the broader efforts of the BRICS nations, truly challenge the dollar's reign in the decades to come? The road ahead is uncertain, but the direction is unmistakable. As China expands its web of currency agreements to include more than 40 countries, the world is watching and preparing for what comes next. Will the yuan become the dominant global currency? Could we be moving toward a decentralized financial world, where multiple currencies share influence instead of one reigning supreme? The answers are still unfolding, but one thing is clear. The global financial game is changing, and China is determined to write the next chapter.